Thank you once again for joining us for another episode of Real Estate Chat with ESV Olaleko Abodere, a production of REST, otherwise known as Real Estate Services and Transaction. As we all know, this is a subsidiary of Real Academy Limited, a professional real estate development training center here in Lagos, Nigeria. In the house, as at former times, we have ESV Olaleko Abodere. He is the lead advisor of Olaleko Abodere Consulting, a firm of estate surveyors and valuers, and is also the director of studies of Real Academy Limited. Thank you, sir, for joining us for another episode.
It's my pleasure. Thank you, viewers.
Yes. So, still on the matter, like I said, still on the matter of mortgage properties, buying mortgage properties. So today we're going to talk about, which is a continuation from our previous episode. We're going to talk about processes of buying a property under legal mortgage from the mortgagee. So that's what we're going to talk about today. So on that note, I want you to
thank you.
Start from there, sir.
I remember last week last episode, we discussed about when such property is to be bought from a mortgagor.
That's correct.
Okay, now from the mortgagee, if it's to be bought from mortgagee. Yeah, because mortgagor and mortgagees are the parties to the mortgage transaction. In this case, the mortgagee is the bank, is the lender, is the one to whom the property are being mortgaged. And that is the one that now want to sell. That is what we are talking about. And another thing viewers must understand here is that we are looking at where that property is already under legal mortgage. That means the mortgagee had actually registered, obtained governor's consent or minister's consent in Nigeria here on the property. So where is to be bought? The first thing under the processes, as I said earlier, is equally the due diligences about the title of the property itself. There are two issues here. One is the mortgage. The other one is the title, right? The title of the property that has been mortgaged and that is now to be bought. As I said earlier, for example, if, let's say all is well about the transaction, if there is problem with the title, it's still a problem. So that problem, that due diligence is about the title, about the type of interest that subsists in the title, the tenor conditions, and so on and so forth, must be found out, must be confirmed, and must be found satisfactory and supportive of the investment decision. That is number one thing that must be done by the buyer. And that is not limited to buying mortgage property, so long it has to do with real estate. This due diligences must be done. Now, by in a case where the property is under a legal mortgage and needs to be sold by the bank. Now, bank can sell. There is power of sales that the bank reserves or the financial institution. That power of sales, in this case, connotes that they are selling under distress. Yes, because when it is foreclosed, like we are not talking of to buy mortgaged property anymore. It becomes a free property after foreclosure. But the moment we say to buy a mortgaged property or a property under legal mortgage, it means that bank has not foreclosed. And bank now want to sell. Now, because they want to sell, there are conditions, requisites, before that power can become exercisable. Before the bank that right to sell will mature, there are conditions precedent to that. The buyer must make sure that those conditions have been met.
That's correct, yeah.
The first situation is that there must be an evidence to show without any ambiguity that the mortgagor had defaulted and continue to default. Now, given that, their bank must have shown that they have been demanding so that there won't be contributory negligence. Bank must show evidence that demands have been made, series of demands have been made to the borrower, who is the mortgagor, and he had not been able to meet up with his obligations. So the loan is going bad. Not only that, very importantly, bank must serve notices to the mortgagor. And I think the law requires, I'm not a lawyer, but I would rather advise viewers when transacting on this to ensure proper confirmation from legal practitioners. But I am aware, because I've transacted on mortgage properties in these circumstances, that condition precedents require 3 notices What I'm not sure there is the period of each of the notices. Those periods must lapse.
Okay.
3 notices must have been served on the mortgagor concerning the intention of the bank to sell if he continues to default. First notice must be served and be given the period of grace. Second notice must be served and be given the required period, minimum period that the law requires. And the third notice must be served and must be given the minimum period that the law requires. Without that, the risk is this. The right of the mortgagee to sell has not become exercisable, has not matured, if those conditions are not met. It means if the buyer buys, it stands the chance that that transaction can be voided. It can be set aside. Though in a rare case, court actually frowns at defaulting on the part of mortgagor too. Of course, will you say the society, the money should not go back to the purse of the country? No. So courts normally frowns at that too. But again, the privileges that the mortgagor has must not be deprived of him. And that is by ensuring these notices as required by law are served and the required period for him to exercise have been given to him. A code note of warning is that buyers should not buy such property during the pendency of the notice. It's very, very difficult. During the pendency of the notice, buyers should not buy. So, my emphasis here and what buyers should pay attention to is the adequacy of the notice and the notice period. 2 things. The notice, has bank served up to 3 notices? Adequacy of notice, the notice period. Each of the notices, the law requires certain duration to be given to the mortgagor for the mortgagor to perform. Right? Has the guy still been defaulting? Has the bank given such notice period for each respective notices? And as the final notice period lapsed, where it has lapsed, the right to sell becomes matured.
Okay.
The bank can exercise that right to dispose of that asset. Right? So these are the processes that must be done if one is to buy. In that situation, the buyer does not have any recourse and ordinarily will not need any recourse to the mortgagor. He's facing the mortgagee, which is the bank. He does not even need to know the mortgagor. He does not need to go and have meeting. He does not need to seek his or her consent. Unless he feels that maybe with that, he might use that to prevent the guy going to court or what have you. You want to bring them together. Unless that. But in terms of seamless transaction, this transaction will not require that mortgagor, so long as it's a legal mortgage. And that power has matured for the bank to exercise it. So the risk area is to pay attention to the adequacy of the notices and the notice period. That period for the last notice must lapse before consummating the deal. Due diligences, discussion, and so on could be going on.
That's correct.
But the payment for that property should not predate the final day of the final of the notice period of the final notice.
Yeah, and you mentioned a valid point, really, because it simply means that because sometimes some individuals might think, oh, because I'm buying from a bank, that means everything is fine, there's no issue. But you mentioned something about evidence. In other words, there should be substantial evidence to show that the bank actually has that right to sell that property. In the sense, some of the things that you have mentioned about notices and the likes before, both for professional representing the interest of his client and even the client himself, so that if there's any inadequacy somewhere,
you see, the bank can show mortgage, deed of mortgage, because usually that power to sell is usually entrenched in the deed of mortgage. But that power is a sleeping power. Because once a mortgage is ever a mortgage,
that's correct,
it does not become active or operational until there is default. And that the default persists and could not be rescued, and that bank have been demanding, and that no adequate notices and notice period have been given. At that time, with adequate notice and notice period, right? That power comes alive, becomes active, becomes operational, becomes mature, and bank can exercise.
So in other words, how do I put it? there's a period where the bank can exercise that right.
Yes, and that period must be attained before the bank will say we are selling.
Exactly.
Yes.
Exactly.
And
exactly.
that behoves every investors to ensure engaging professionals.
Exactly. Because I mean, ordinarily, an individual might not have the knowledge of knowing.
Of course. You engage professionals. More importantly, because buyers, investors could be tempted by the price,
Exactly.
the premium they will enjoy.
Exactly, the property is in a prime location, and you're like, oh, I've always wanted to buy
And
property.
you are buying at a reasonable premium.
Exactly.
You want to rush into it. Be careful.
Yeah.
It might be a very great exposure.
Yeah.
So it's good to ensure that that power actually becomes matured and that the bank can exercise it safely. At that point, it's not likely that that transaction could be set aside after fulfilling all those obligations. If there could be other redress that the mortgagor could seek, but it's not for court to set aside that transaction if those conditions, statutory requirements have been met.
Yeah, I like the fact you said statutory. That means it's enforceable by law.
Yeah, it's provision of law. It's provision of law. However, unless the agreement, the mortgage agreements spell otherwise.
Okay.
I mean, for example, the law has provided for conditions to be met. But the two parties could say, we want our conditions to be in the following terms.
Okay.
Because it's only when there is a failure of agreement between parties, then the operation of the law becomes so if the agreement states otherwise, then it will be as agreed. But if it does not, and mostly, I think most mortgage transactions had always been following the provision of statutes. And it's equally even safer. They even say agreement demands lesser period. It's safer for the bank to exercise what the statute has provided for, so that there won't be any ambiguity, no issue. Then you can buy safely. I bought a mortgage property in Ikeja GRA some years back. When I was to buy that property, they have not served the last notice. Okay. And they have put it in the invite. It was already in the hands of debt recovery agency. Okay. So we had to buy. Then with our lawyer, who is a good friend, we went together, we looked at it, and we studied and interacted with the agency. When do you want to pay? Let's see the notices. And at the end of the day, we realized that notice, they've not served the last one. So we insisted. Then we come to agreement, did negotiation, that we said we are not paying unless that notice is served. So they served the notice. We allowed the period. I think the period is 14 days for the last one. If my memory serves me well. We allowed the notice to lapse. The notice period to lapse. I think it lapsed on Friday, if I remember. On Monday, we effected our payment. Because
the bank already has the authority
to exercise. Funny enough, the mortgagor went to court. Wow. Yes, but he didn't win. He went to court, he sued the bank, and attached us as join us. Because he met us on the land. It's a property with an undeveloped building. Okay. He met us. But he lost out. So if those conditions have not been met, wow, you stand the risk.
And that's where the role of due diligence come in, like you rightly said.
It's very important. Engage the professionals.
Exactly.
Yeah. Don't say you know it too. Don't go and burn your fingers. Okay?
All right, so moving on. Of course, obviously, I know that there are documents under this kind of, there are documents to be obtained.
Yeah. Anyway, just like the under when it's to be sold by the mortgagor. In this case, it's a little different.
Okay.
The difference is that, number one, those documents, let me first of all mention them. Deed of assignment is one. Mostly in this circumstance, is the bank that will issue that deed of assignment. Okay. It's the bank that will equally execute that deed of assignment. Yes. The mortgagor is no more required. The bank will execute that deed of assignment. That is number one. Number two is that there will be need for the bank to equally execute transfer form or issue transfer letter. Transfer form, as we said in our last episode, vary from state to state.
That's correct.
In Lagos, we call it Form 1C. That's true. In Ogun State, they call it transfer form. In federal government, they call it letter of consent. Okay. Letter of consent to register the title. Okay. And in most states like that, You have either you have letter of consent, you have a specific form they have prepared as transfer form. That form must equally be executed. Because the problem is that if the form is not part of the document at the disposal of the buyer, he will not be able to obtain transfer of title, legal transfer of title to himself. The consent will not be given to him because it's part of the requirement for processing consent, either minister's consent or governor's consent, in whatever form it takes. Now, again, we equally need to emphasize that there will be need for the buyer to ensure that he collects the original title of the property from the bank. As he's collecting the deed of assignment executed in his favor, he's collecting the original title from the bank. Again, then he must collect the deed of mortgage. He will collect, because the power of the bank to exercise that sales is vested through to the bank through that deed of mortgage. So he will collect that. In this circumstance, he will need deed of release. Because by executing the deed of assignment, the bank has ordinarily, by implication, released the property. So deed of release will not be necessary. Right? Now, another document that most often people don't ask for is the building plan approval. I think these days too, bank is becoming more knowledgeable, more meticulous about the documents they collect at the time of consummating or creating a primary mortgage. That document is building plan approval. Excuse me, building plan approval is not a document of title, but it's a document that relates to the development. If it's a bare land, building plan approval will not be necessary.
Yeah, that's correct.
But where it is not a bare land, where it is just where it's a developed property, then that property must have been, the approval must have been obtained before
construction.
Yeah, before building that. So there is need for that building plan approval, so that if the buyer wants to do renovation, he has something to fall back on. If he wants to do improvement, he has something to fall back on. If government is doing planning audits, he has evidence to show. Without that building plan approval, right, in any of the circumstances that I have mentioned, the buyer will have a very great exposure. If he is not able to collect it, if he does not have it, he will have a very great exposure. Because even these days, we are experiencing a lot of things in Lagos and Abuja now. Lagos is doing planning audits. And they will ask you to present the building plan approval of your building, even if it is 30 years old. And if you don't have it, then you are into it. They don't mind issuing you, giving you approval, but you pay through your nose. You pay penalty, you do as-built drawing, you make submissions, they assess it. You know, in fact, before they listen to you, they first of all go ask you to go and pay something to the purse of government. Right? What we know planning to be before is to drive social value. But now I think government is equally using planning instruments for income generation. Yes, that's obvious. But that notwithstanding, they have reserved that power, police power, to exercise that. You know, in our language, we call it power of negative control. Yeah, they use it is a negative power. They use it to delimit, to control the positive power vested in the proprietor, in property owners. But it's to guarantee social value, to ensure orderliness in our society. It's just that they are now using it otherwise now. So that building plan approval must be obtained. And not even only in this case. In buying any property, buyer must ensure, so long as a developed property, must ensure that the building plan approval is requested and is obtained from the seller. Where it is not available is a different case. And where it's not available, I will advise that the buyer should assess the implication.
Yeah, because I was just going to ask that question. That what happens when the
it can. There will always be a way around it legally, but it has exposure in terms of cost, in terms of time, in terms of challenges, logistics, right? In fact, it can even have implications in terms of approvability or non-approvability of the building. So where it's not available, then, you know, at that time, the buyer would have known that is in for a risk, then it should assess that risk,
Yes.
determine the impact of that risk, and be able to know whether it's able to still go ahead
Or not.
or not.
Yes.
So why buying from a bank, request from the bank to have, among all other documents we have mentioned, approved building plan for the structure that have been collateralized to them. So these are the documents. And with those two documents, the buyer can conveniently secure title in his name. As if mortgage has never existed
in the first place. Yes. Yeah. Yes. Thank you so much. This has been very, very informative. Any final words, sir?
Well, I'd say I see mortgaged property as, opportunities for investors. Whoever has money, I advise that you take advantage of the premium that such mortgage properties normally offer, particularly where it's being sold by the mortgagee. And that will assist the mortgage market because the money will go back to the mortgage system. So investors, but while doing that, please ensure that you engage professionals and ensure that the right due diligences are done.
Thank you very much. So on that note, we have come to the end of another episode of Real Estate Chat with ESV Olaliko Abodering. Please remember to follow us on our social media platforms, which is displayed at the bottom of your screen. If you have any suggestions, comments, feedbacks to today's program, please also send us a message on those platforms. Until I see you again next time, bye-bye from me, and God bless.